Morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session from the Charity for Civil Servants, today in partnership with Relate. And today's session, Relationship Counselling, everything you wanted to know but were scared to ask. Shortly I'll be introducing you to our colleagues from Relate, Dee and Carole. But before we do that, we'll go through just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm actually talking to you today from Edinburgh, which is surprisingly warm actually for this time of year, about 8 degrees. And my colleagues Dee and Carole are based over in, one is in East Yorkshire and one in Southampton. So we're doing this truly remotely today. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the technology won't let us down. So just before we get started, if you're joining us online, welcome. You should see on your screen a console similar to what you can see on the slide here. And we encourage you to ask any questions, make comments, or any thoughts that you have that you want to share. And you can do that by popping them into the questions box. All of those are anonymous, and I can pose those to our colleagues at Relate as we go through the session. If you're joining us by phone, again, welcome. Hopefully you'll have been able to access the slides. You can find them on our website under Digital Tools and Help and Advice Webinars, and you can download the PowerPoint presentation to follow along. Equally, if you'd like to make comments, ask any questions, you can do so by emailing webinar@foryoubyou.org.uk. Which we monitor throughout each of the webinar broadcasts. And again, I can pose those anonymously to our colleagues at Relate. First though, before we hand over to Relate, just to tell you a little bit about the charity in case you're not familiar with this. Our vision is a lifelong community of people offering effective support for each other when life takes a turn for the worse. So we very much think of the civil service and the charity as part of a bigger community. We're funded by civil servants themselves through their generosity, through fundraising and donations. And what we do with that is provide a range of support, and that can be financial assistance for people who are struggling through difficult times in their lives, through money advice, debt advice, support for people's well-being and their mental health, and support for people who perhaps find themselves with additional caring responsibilities and are kind of juggling those with their everyday lives and working lives. So that's enough about us for now. I'm now going to pass over and hand over to Carole and Dee from Relate, who will introduce themselves and take you through their presentation.
Thanks very much for that, Kevin. So, hi everybody. I am, sorry, could you just change the slide, please? Sorry, I am Carole Florin White. I'm the National Partnerships Manager with Relate. So I actually manage the contract that we have with the Charity for Civil Servants, along with a range of contracts that we hold with other benevolent associations. And Dee is just going to introduce herself.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Dee Holmes, and I'm a senior practice consultant with Relate. I am a qualified counsellor supervisor in relationship, family, young persons and children's counselling. So every service we offer except psychosexual therapy and mediation. And my role at the moment is sort of really offering support to the whole organisation. I'm mainly based in the southeast on sort of practice and clinical issues.
Thanks for that, Dee. So actually I thought, just to explain to you, for those of you who might not be aware, Relate is a charity, and we specialise in supporting people around relationship issues. So we offer a whole range of services, which we will talk about today. We offer, commonly people perceive us as the Marriage Guidance Council, which we were formerly, but that was back in the day, and we've moved on considerably since then. So just so that you're aware, we offer services to anybody, irrespective of what kind of relationship they're in, or they may not even be in a relationship. So just a very quick snapshot there. Could you change the slide, please, Kevin? So what we're going to do, we thought about how we can best demystify counselling for you. And we thought perhaps the most interesting and engaging way to do that would be to do what we would call a talking head. That may or may not be a term that you're familiar with, but essentially I'm going to ask Dee a range of questions, which I think are some of the most commonly asked questions that people want to know about counselling, and she's going to respond. So it's basically a conversation between Dee and I, and we thought that would be engaging for you. But for those of you that want to know a bit more of the detail, there are various slides in this pack that give more information about Relate and the various different services we offer and why people come to us. So there's the fun side of it, but there's also the information side of it as well. Then I'm going to explain to you a bit about what counselling is accessible to civil servants, their dependents, and previous civil servants, former civil servants, and then we will open up for a Q&A. If there's time at the end of that, we can run through some of the other slides as well. So without further ado, we will move into the talking head, which I hope that you will find interesting and possibly just a little bit amusing. So, Dee,
Yeah.
one of the things that I would really like to know is, well, it's a big question, but what will actually happen when I come to Relate? What will I get?
Right, so with all our services, whatever service someone was accessing, we would always carry out an assessment first, and that would be your first opportunity to meet with the counsellor. There is a little bit of sort of, data capture in that, but we do some of that by emailing it out ahead now. And that first session really is a chance for people to come and explore whether this is the right place for them, and talk about what's brought them there and what they want to get from counselling. So obviously with couples, we would usually see the couple together for the first assessment. Sometimes people come individually, sometimes one person comes and says, well, my partner doesn't want to come, and then when they go home, sometimes the partner does decide they want to come at the next session. If we're seeing families, we would always sort of see the adults first. So, I mean, if we had a family present that was all full of adults, sort of grown up children, then we would probably invite them all to the assessment. But they would all be given an opportunity to have a bit of individual time. And with young people's counselling, again, usually the young people will come to the assessment themselves. We may involve parents if that's what the young person wants and that feels appropriate to do. Is that a good enough answer to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this might seem like a strange question, but, there's lots of preconceptions about counselling, and we're all quite familiar with counselling that we might see in American dramas and that kind of thing. Yeah. What does it actually, I mean, what will the room look like? Is it,
right,
is there a couch?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I mean, because we obviously, have services throughout the country and in different types of buildings, so that can range really from, a very purpose-built sort of centre, where it is really built where there are counselling rooms. We sometimes share them with other counselling organisations or the Citizens Advice Bureau. So that will be a fairly standard room, which might have, 3 chairs in really, or it might have a couch, as you say. We're usually if there's a couch, there's usually a couple because of couches, so that it might be that people don't want to sit together on the settee. So we are quite mindful of having the room in quite an anonymous way that is quite comfortable and not too distracting, but doesn't, force people to sit miles apart or too close together. And some of our centres are based in, what was a house that's been converted. So you might be sitting in, a room that was originally a living room, but obviously has been made to, look more like a counselling room and be fairly, bland is the wrong word, but, fairly non-distracting for people.
That's great, thanks for that. And you mentioned that there will be an initial assessment. Mm-hmm. So in that first appointment, do we actually have any counselling or?
That can really vary. I mean, it's not usually, there isn't usually time to sort of get into counselling, but I think what is really beneficial in that first session is, one of the questions that obviously is asked to people is, what's brought you here, or what are the issues that you feel you want to resolve, or that type of question. And I think for a lot of people, they often feedback that when they're hearing their partner answer that question, they are listening to that answer in a very different way to if they said it to each other. So when a couple might say, well, what's the problem, or what do you want me to change, or what do you want to be different, we don't always hear what somebody says back to us, because we're starting to think of our reply to them. Whereas I think when you've got a third person that answer is being directed to, that's quite powerful. So whilst we may not be getting into the nitty-gritty of the counselling, I think it's a really beneficial session to help people sort of focus on, oh yeah, that's what's really going on for my partner, and makes them think themselves, actually, yes, what do I really want, because people often can answer with quite vague things like, well, I want the relationship to be better, or I want to be happier. And you need to drill down, and that will happen during the course of the counselling, into, well, what would the relationship being better look like? What does that actually mean? What does feeling happier mean? How would you know that had happened to you if you woke up tomorrow morning and the relationship was better? How would it be?
Yeah. So I really, then it's the counselling is sort of led by the client, really. If I was a client, it would be led by what I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at that first session, certainly with couple counselling, you're gathering what's brought the people there, and taking some sort of background information, which will then be explored, as the sessions progress into the future. And sometimes people have a very, specific sort of thing that they want to discuss, and sometimes it is just more of a general feeling of things just aren't right, and we just want to explore how we can make things a bit better, how we can learn to communicate a bit better.
Yeah, okay. So how would that work if I came with, a partner, for example, and they wanted to address something entirely different? I mean, maybe they might tell me something or say something that I just didn't have a clue was an issue in the relationship. How would that work?
Yeah, I mean, that can often happen, that people can arrive and they have very different ideas of what's wrong, but that's a really useful sort of starting point. And as I say, I think that that's something people often at the end of the first session, or when they come back and you might reflect with them, how was it, when you came last time, what have you thought about since? They may often sort of be, gosh, I didn't know that my partner thought that or had that issue with our relationship, and it's really made me think about that. I mean, obviously we sometimes get people who come with completely different desirable outcomes, and I suppose the most obvious of that is a couple that might arrive and one of them says, we really want to, I really want things to be better between us, we've drifted apart. And the other person might say, well, actually, I think that this relationship's over for me, and I don't want us to try and save it. I want us to just separate as amicably as possible.
And how would we deal with that then?
That's always the most difficult thing. I mean, obviously at Relate, we're seeing people with a range of relationship difficulties, and we are all about relationships. So whilst, yes, the outcome you might hope often is that everybody will walk off into the sunset happy, the sad reality is that relationships do end and people do separate. So there is always some work that can be done around that, and especially if people have children, they're never going to be completely separate from each other, because they will continue to be parents. So I think there's always some useful work about how that separation might be, and it sometimes gives people a place to express their anger, their upset, their disappointment. But I think it is tricky, and if you have one person who can't accept the relationship is over, then you may well at some point be moving to some more individual work, because obviously you can't make someone stay in a relationship if they don't want to, and it can take some time for people to reach the same place.
Yeah, okay. And so just to be clear as well, if you know, would we support somebody who was not in a relationship at all?
Yes, yes. I mean, people sometimes do come because they, have just ended a relationship has just ended for them, and they're not with that partner, or that partner isn't interested. Sometimes people will say, well, actually, this relationship's over for me, and I'm going, and I'm not going to come to relate with you or anything like that. So I think it's a really good place for people to be able to sort of process some of that loss and sadness that's around at the ending of a relationship.
Or maybe even to understand why they can't, you know, relationships don't seem to work out for them.
Yeah, that's right. People often sometimes realise, that we do see people who say, I'm single at the moment, and before I get into another relationship, I want to really explore why I seem to have had a succession of relationships that haven't worked out, why I always go for the same person, and that perhaps isn't the right person for me. So there's a lot of work that can be done around exploring, what your idea of a good relationship is, what your idea of a good partner is, and whether you're actually, repeating patterns too much, and you need to take stock of that.
Mm. And what about relationships at work? Is it just sort of intimate relationships, or can you help
We,
with
yeah, we
relationships?
do. Yeah, we do see people who want to discuss their relationships in general. I mean, when we talk about family counselling, sometimes that is a family who come together, maybe parents who are struggling with teenagers and they want to try and develop a better communication altogether, or obviously blended families who want to come and sort some issues out in a safe place. But we also see people when their counselling is about their family and their family relationships or their friendships, and so that's certainly very true. I've certainly seen people in the past where they just sort of want to explore relationships in general.
Okay, that's fine. So I guess a burning question really is around affairs and infidelity, and whether or not really couples can actually ever get over an affair.
Yes, and I think it's very true to say that quite a lot of our casework, one of the presenting problems will be an affair, or a friendship, and in these days off, sometimes people might have been texting someone else or emailing them, and so the definition of an affair is quite broad, really. I often, for me, it's really, I would define it as some relationship that you have had outside of your couple relationship that you have perhaps not been honest with your partner about, and sometimes not with yourself, so but I think it is something that it's often the tipping point that brings people to relate. Can people get over them? I think a lot depends for us all on our past experiences, our sort of narratives, our views on things. So for some people, it's an absolute sort of breach of trust that they will never be able to forgive. For some people, they can see that actually the relationship wasn't right and there were issues, and that actually, although the affair is a serious breach of trust and a huge thing that's happened, they can sort of understand on some level why it might have happened, and they may want to, repair the damage from it, but also make the relationship stronger. I think for me, I remember certainly once seeing a couple where one of them had an affair, and the other person quite honestly said in the first session, I'm absolutely furious that she's had the affair, but actually I nearly had an affair last year, so one of my real anger is the fact that I sort of didn't, and I could have done actually, because she went and did it this year. But in a way, what they were sort of saying was, actually, it could have been either of us, and okay, I didn't, but I can see that actually we should have taken more care of our relationship, and I should have raised that last year when I was tempted, and we might not be where we are now.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I suppose if I was thinking of coming for adult relationship counselling, I suppose one of the things that might worry me would be that actually, you think you know that you're the person that you're with, and then you might sort of come to the sessions and actually it come out that your partner is having an affair, and that would be really difficult to deal with, I think.
Yes, I think that there is always that sort of fear that, you know, you might go along with one problem, I suppose is what you're saying,
Yeah.
and another two or three might come up. But I think that it's you know, people often, it reminds people of what perhaps brought them together. I mean, I think there's an interesting thing that what we sometimes find annoying in a partner or irritating, if you think about it, might be something that we were actually attracted to initially. And so I think people probably know quite a lot about their partners. They've perhaps forgotten some of it or ignored it. So, you know, I suppose there, I mean, things like people might say, oh gosh, you know, she's so tidy, and they put everything away. And if you say what attracted you to that person, they might say, oh, they're so organised and thorough with everything, you know,
Yeah.
and it's the flip side of the same thing. So sometimes it can remind people. Yes, I've certainly, I mean, I once saw a couple where they'd come because there was a suspected affair that the woman thought the man had, and he, you know, categorically denied that there was nothing going on and hadn't been. And he told me in an individual session, he said, absolutely, I haven't had an affair with this person, she thinks, you know. He said, but I did have an affair 15 years ago, he said, and I'm wondering whether I should tell her about that. And you know, so that we sort of talked about that, and you know, it wasn't for me to say whether he should or not, but I guess what was happening there was maybe he thought she didn't know about the affair 15 years before, but maybe she had some feeling about it. Maybe there was some lack of trust that had led her to the feelings she was having at that time. But one of the things that, you know, a question I posed to him is, if you tell her about that now, is that because you want to be totally honest and bring that out, or is it to alleviate the guilt you've been carrying for 15 years? And, you know, what will be the outcomes of that? I think people need to think carefully about, you know, why they might be going to do something like that.
That's a really helpful example, actually, because I think what it illustrates to me is it's not necessarily part of the counselling process is actually speaking to somebody who is entirely independent from your situation, and then almost sort of not asking you the questions that you need to ask yourself, really, I guess.
I guess that's
helping you to find your own way forward as opposed to telling you what to do, I guess.
And I think that's it. You know, one of the powerful things about sort of counselling, one of the basic counselling skills is reflecting back to people. So, you know, when someone says something to you and you reflect back with, well, I'm wondering, you know, what you mean by that, or I'm wondering, you know, I've heard you say that you know, taking that example, I'm hearing you say that you had an affair 15 years ago that wasn't discovered, has never been discussed, and you're wondering now whether that's something it would be useful to share with your partner, you know. And I think sometimes hearing that the statement said back to someone, they hear it and can start to think about it, as you say.
Definitely, yeah. I think another question that we get a lot is around people that argue all the time. So, you know, feeling that, you know, how can the relationship be mended when all they can do is argue?
And I think the word argue is probably something you sometimes ask couples that question, or it will come up in an assessment, and they will say, oh, we've come because we argue all the time. And then one of them will say, we don't, we just bicker a bit. So again, we all have different, you know, preconceptions of what that means. And I think probably if you've come from a family where, you know, you might have had a lot of siblings, there might have been lots of arguments, and then you're with someone who's an only child, you know, they may view that quite differently, you know. And what I often start by doing is sort of getting people to define what they mean when they say they're arguing or bickering. And I think in lots of ways, if you're arguing about something, you know, especially early in relationships, people need to argue a bit to sort out some of those ground rules. You know, things come up and they're not happy with them, and that's the way they communicate. But I think arguing when it gets to a stage where people are just disrespectful to each other, and it's not really about a specific thing, it's more just about, you know, those phrases like you always do that, or you never listen to me, or you're always, you know, those sort of things. And people can be really quite disrespectful and cruel to each other and say some quite horrible things. And I think when I think it's not about the arguments. I think it's about the respect. And I think if arguments are respectful, then they may be okay because they're just the way you're sorting things out. But when people lose respect for each other, I think that's a really difficult place to come back from, actually.
Right, okay. I suppose that leads me into wondering really how successful Relate is in terms of the services it delivers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question that people always ask me. You know, it's the sort of dinner party question when people ask me what I do, and then they say, "Oh, how successful is Relate?" And I think it's really hard to gauge in lots of ways. I mean, we do sort of do some monitoring of outcomes, but I mean, going back to what we said about different agendas, if a couple come and one of them wants to separate and one wants to stay together, the outcomes they're going to say at the end, the one who, if they've separated, which is probably what would happen, the one who's separated will say, yeah, it was great, brilliant service, I got what I wanted, whereas the other person will say, no, that wasn't great, I didn't get what I wanted. So with a couple, you may well get different views on that. I think we also have to measure success by, whether people actually go away, even if it doesn't make their relationship absolutely wonderful, that if they go away having learned something, or they go away and separate more amicably, or they are able to communicate as a family better, that's, and it's sometimes part of a process. The biggest recommendations, I sometimes think, are the clients that come back.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've certainly had clients, who've come and said, we came to Relate, 10, 12 years ago, because we were going through a difficult time when we had our first baby, and it really helped us. And actually, we're now having a difficult time because one of us has been made redundant, or, we've got an elderly relative we're caring for, a different life issue. And we actually thought, let's go to Relate and sort of relearn some of those things we've forgotten a bit, and help us get through this crisis, sort of thing. So I think that's a really good recommendation for us.
Yeah, I remember actually somebody, they were actually a manager of one of our Relate centres, and they told me that they'd previously had Relate counselling in the past, and it led to their relationship breaking up. And at that time, if we'd have asked, how successful was the service, they said that they would have said it was dreadful because the relationship ended. And, but if we'd have asked them a few months later, they would have said, oh, it was amazing because it was the best thing that could have happened to me. I needed to end that relationship, and I wouldn't have been able to do it myself. So yeah, I think it's a difficult one to gauge, really. Yeah, okay. So I'm conscious we've also talked a lot about sort of couple counselling, and I know that PST is not something that you deliver, sex therapy, but I think it might just be helpful to understand a little bit more about what sex therapy is, and is it just about, oh, I'm not having enough sex in my life, or is it something different?
Sex therapy is a service that really is offered to couples where their relationship is pretty, okay, they're communicating quite well, but there is a sexual issue. So we would define a sexual issue as a sort of dysfunction. So that would be things like erectile problems, vaginismus. Lack of desire would also come into that category as a dysfunction, because they're often very tightly interlinked. If people are have an issue with something like like vaginismus or an erectile issue that happens, that can then often lead them to not, to having less desire because they're worried about that repeating. So, it can, and there's lots of things that can sort of tie in with that. As I said, it's not a service I'm trained in, but obviously I know a bit about it. And that involves a slightly different assessment process. You still come together and have an assessment of what is the problem, and then you're both given quite an intensive sort of, it can be up to an hour and a half, sort of what we call a history take, which is done individually, and looks at people's sexual history and, quite in depth at their ideas about sex, etc. And then they would come back together for what's called a round table, where the therapist and the couple would talk about, you know, sorting out a sort of what they call a plan of what they're going to do. So it's much more behavioural focused in that there are exercises to do, which people go away and do at home. They don't do them in the room. That's why you haven't got to do anything in the room. And then the therapist will sort of guide you through that week by week, and, you know, how was that exercise? So, you know, for some people, you know, there's an exercise called sensate focus. So that is about taking sex off the agenda, but getting them to, you know, massage each other or to have a bath together or different things like that. So, but it's very much tailored to what the issue is and what and that couple and what will work for them. Because for some people, the thought of having to go away and massage each other might be, no, I don't want to do that. So
yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that. So my last question really is just around, you know, do lots of people access counselling, or is it because I guess people might feel that, you know, they don't know anybody else that is going to counselling, perhaps because people don't really talk about it, and therefore they might feel a bit, you know, like it's something out of the ordinary, and it's a bit of stigma, I guess, really.
Yes. I think it's like a lot of those things. Once people, I mean, you said about the manager who told you they'd been, and you know, there's certainly lots of times when I said to someone the other day, they asked me what I did, and I said I work for Relate, and I said, oh, we went to Relate 20 years ago, you know. So I think that, and the greatest thing really, the most satisfying situations are couples who do come before things have got too bad, who actually notice things, you know, not being as good as they could be, and think, you know, I will go and have some counselling. I think probably counselling is much more on people's minds and much more out there these days than it was perhaps 20 years ago. But lots of people come to Relate, and, you know, it's something that a lot of people are quite willing these days to talk about, you know, and again, I've bumped into ex-clients, and of course you do the thing of, you know, not acknowledging them, but you know, I've certainly had people come up to me in Smith's once and introduce the friend they were with as, oh, this is the person we went to at Relate, you know. So,
oh gosh, right, okay.
You know, which is good, because I think that helps demystify it, doesn't it? People say, gosh, you went to Relate, oh right, you know, good, what was it like? And word spreads. But I mean, last year, in the year sort of 18-19, we saw 72,400 people in our couple counselling service.
Wow.
So, you know, that's a lot of people. And over 4,000 coming for sex therapy, you know, and we have, like, apparently we had nearly 4 million visitors to our website last year. So
wow, that's unbelievable. Yeah, okay. So more in demand and not as maybe stigmatizing as people might think.
No.
Okay. So thanks very much, Dee. I found that really helpful, and hopefully the audience did. So that was the end of the talking head. I'm going to talk now briefly about what services the CFCS fund in terms of Relate counselling. So basically, through this contract, which we've held with the Charity for Civil Servants for quite a few years now, we offer adult relationship counselling, young people's counselling, family counselling, and PST. Those services are available for current and ex-civil servants and their dependents, and most of those services are available face-to-face or digitally. So what I mean by that, digitally, is that we can also offer the services by telephone, by webcam, by email, or by a bookable live chat session as well. So that's really to try and make the sessions as accessible as possible, because it's not always convenient for people to physically go somewhere face-to-face, especially if they're maybe living or working separately from their partner. Just to tell you that, as we've talked about, adult relationship counselling can be for couples, or it can be for individuals wanting to come and talk about relationship issues as well. Young people's counselling is primarily aged 11 to 18-year-olds, and as Dee mentioned in the talking head, we see the young people on their own, but it might involve their parents if there's an agreement to do that. family counselling, it can be any type of family. It can be the nuclear family or the more extended family, and it might be that, you know, all part. It could involve step families as well, and they might be all in one session together, or it might be, you know, that seeing having different sessions. And then PST, I think Dee's just explained what that's about and how it does differ ever so slightly from counselling. Okay, next slide, please. So if you are thinking about counselling, then how would you go about accessing it? Well, there are now 2 routes by which that you can access CFCS funded counselling. By far the most popular is the voucher route, and I would say probably around 90% of the clients from the CFCS come through that route. So what happens with that is that you go on their website and you complete a light touch form, and that then, as a result of that, you get an email back with a voucher code, and you contact us on a dedicated number, and you give us that voucher code, and that will entitle you to access 4 sessions of any of our services. The more slightly longer route is the full application. Now this route involves a means test with the CFCS, but that does entitle you to more sessions up front. So you would get 6 sessions of all services, or up to 6 sessions, should I say, of all services, and up to, except for PST, which you could get up to 12 services. But as I said, you go through a means test for that, and it is a slightly longer process. I think there's a bit of admin time involved in that as well. So the voucher scheme is also a quicker route, and as I said, it's a much more popular route. Next slide, please. So what happens next? Well, in both cases, assuming that you've been through your initial assessment and you've contacted us, you can actually agree with your counsellor if you feel that you need more sessions. And you would do that by contacting the Charity for Civil Servants again, and they may approve a number more sessions for you. They would want to speak to us about that and just double check that the counsellor feels it's needed as well. But that is something that's available, and sometimes we encourage people, if they do want to go through the voucher route initially, we say that if you and your counsellor feel that more sessions are likely to be needed than the 4, then we would encourage you to speak to the CFCS about booking more additional sessions as soon as possible, because obviously then you will need to go through the means test process, and so we don't want there to be a gap in your counselling sessions. The other option, of course, is that you can carry on in a self-funding way. So on that basis, you would, after your sessions had run out, you would be charged what the local centre's rate is for that counselling, and that does vary depending on where they're based and their costs and that kind of thing. So there isn't a set charge, it does vary. So sorry, I didn't cover off there, just to say that once you've got your unique code from the CFCS, either your voucher or your unique code from going through the means test, you contact us on a bespoke number and we register you in for an assessment. Your call comes through to our response team. So they're a team of highly trained staff that are based in Doncaster. It's not a call centre, it's more of a triage point really, and they will talk to you about, you know, where you're based and what kind of intervention you're looking for, and whether you want it face-to-face or digitally. And then for some centres, some parts of the country, we can actually make the appointment for you, and for others, what we do is we email the relevant centre and ask them to make contact with you as soon as possible, but in all cases that will be within 7 days, and then they will contact you and book an appointment, and then you will go along for your initial assessment. So that's what happens next. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. Over to you for questions, actually. So I think we've just about covered off everything we wanted to say. We can go through the other slides as well if there's time at the end, but really over to you, Kevin, to let us know what questions there are.
Great, thank you both. So lots of information there, really insightful. And there's a number of questions, some of which came in before we started this morning and others that have come in since. So we'll go through as many as we can within the time. If anyone's got any other questions, obviously feel free to submit them. And if we don't get to them, we'll try and follow up to you if it's not been answered within the others.
Oh yeah, we will do that, yeah.
Okay, so first question. This person says they're having real problems with a colleague at work. They wouldn't go as far as saying it's bullying, but they just don't get on, but they have to work really closely together on a number of projects. Is this something that Relate could help with? And if so, how would I go about dealing with it?
Dee, over to you, I think.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I don't know whether they're thinking that it would be something that they and the colleague could come along together, you know, but certainly it is. I mean, it's, you know, I would probably say that it would be useful for that person to perhaps come and discuss with the counsellor, you know, what is it that, you know, makes it difficult to get on with that person, thinking about some strategies, you know, how they might approach things. Often when we have people, you know, some people are difficult to get on with, that's a fact, but sometimes it can be because we're sort of linking them into people in our past or other experiences we've had, and yeah, and I think that whole thing about bullying is really tricky because, you know, to somebody it's bullying and someone else is, oh, I'm just giving you some banter, you know, and how you address that is quite important, because we all do need to be able to express how we're experiencing something, really.
And we do support people with that kind of bullying issue, don't we?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, it may be that actually this really is a case of some workplace bullying and they really need to, you know, go down an HR route on that. Or it may be that actually, you know, some conversation they could have with that person might help to just change the dynamics in that relationship.
So I guess just some engagement with Relate, though, might help to identify which is the right route in the first place.
Yes, exactly. It might help you to explore for yourself, you know, is this me sort of experiencing this like this, and I need, if I can express that well to the person, they might change how they are, or is actually this something that I really can't deal with, and actually this person is actually bullying me, and I really need to take some action about it. And doing that can be difficult, so it could well be that exploring what that would feel like and how that will be, because you know, it's easy to say, oh, there's an HR route to go down for workplace bullying, but it's not always easy to you know, to take that route, I think, for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely yes there.
Okay. The next question, how do I know if my marriage has gone beyond the point of no return? I'm not sure if it's actually too late for counselling.
You again, Dee.
Again. I think that is a tricky one, because and maybe that goes back to something Carole said about when you go along and you sort of hear things that you didn't know were there, and so sometimes if people are sitting sort of in isolation in that relationship, thinking, gosh, this is a bit too far down the road, you know, coming along and actually sort of being able to say that, and your partner, you know, it may be that yes, they're right and their partner might feel the same, or it may be that actually their partner will be quite surprised to hear that, and that actually they can improve things. I think it's really hard when you're in that difficult place, you know, and like I said, when there might be, you know, a lack of intimacy, a lack of together time, where you're arguing or you're griping with each other, to imagine it can be any different. But I certainly have seen some quite, you know, difficult cases of people very far apart who've found some common ground again. And I think that when you're feeling bad in the relationship, you feel bad about yourself, and so obviously things like people's desire and for intimacy goes, and they feel that, well, actually, will I ever feel I want to be intimate with this person again? But you know, if you can make things a bit better and feel better yourself, that does come back. But yeah, sometimes sadly there might be too much water under the bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tricky one. There's a number of questions coming through about the voucher code and the number of sessions, which possibly more for me to answer, but Carol, do chip in. So one question about how long it takes to get the voucher code from the charity. So the first route that Carol mentioned, the light touch route, as we tend to call it, for the 4 sessions, once you fill out that form and click submit, you should get the voucher code almost instantly. So that's I think probably the reason why it's the most popular, because it's just a very
Yeah.
quick way of doing it. The other route, really, the full application route, purely depends on the demand that the charity is experiencing, but sometimes it can take 4 to 6 weeks for that to be processed. And that's why often, I think, Carol, you said, didn't you, that often people will start with the voucher route, but then might come back to the charity to kind of put the full application in train.
Yeah, absolutely, they can do that. But I mean, I did look at the stats actually recently, and in actual fact, most people that do come through to us from the charity for civil servants often only have about 4 sessions anyway, really. So I think, you know, if you're trying to weigh up which is the best route, I would say that don't be put off by the fact that the voucher scheme is only 4 sessions, because that might be all you need anyway. You might come along and it might be something that, you know, is resolved in 2 or 3 sessions, or you feel that at that point you don't need any more sessions. But equally, you can always change to you know, and get more additional sessions. So I would say, you know, the voucher route is definitely the most popular. It gives you the quickest route into Relate, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just on that, there's a couple of queries about whether the 4 sessions from the voucher are one-off, or if you can come back for more after a certain amount of time has passed. So generally, I mean, I think the best thing to do would be, if you needed more, would be to come back and do the full application, because it might be there's other things that the charity can help with as well. Because I think it's, I mean, Dee, you probably have a view on this, but
I
I
was
think
just,
it's fair to say that there could be other things going on as well.
yes, I was just thinking, as we were talking about the 4 sessions, that one thing we perhaps didn't cover was that question of how long will I be at Relate for? Oh gosh, I'm sorry, there's a drill next door. Oh, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, this is the beauty of live broadcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a foghorn.
I know. Oh dear, oh dear. Hang on, let me see if I can escape somewhere else. There's not much places I can go. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, a bit better. Okay. How long you're at Relate for? And I think on average people come for, say, between 6 and 12 sessions, and so and there are some people that come for a lot longer. So when we say 4 sessions, that may sound like, oh, that's not very long, but a lot of it is about, you know, as I say, that first session, people hear what the problems are, hear each other speak, they go away, they process a bit themselves, and then they come back. And so I think a lot of the work happens between sessions for motivated couples who really want to improve something. 4 sessions can be enough, really, because it gives them some skills and some tools, and they've heard each other, you know, speak with the counsellor and had some interventions. But as you say, also there may be some really big issues that come up and people want to explore those in more depth. And I've certainly seen couples for, you know, 20, 25 sessions, and we've worked through different things along that way. But equally seen people for 4 or 5 sessions and they've gone away saying, we're on the right path now, thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think from the charity's perspective, and we wouldn't want to focus too much on kind of process and procedure, but generally speaking, the idea of the light touch approach is to get people quick access to support, and that we almost kind of reset the clock every year on the number of times people access that. But I would caveat that strongly with that we're here to help. So if you do need more, do just contact us and we'll work out whatever we can to make that happen. Just a follow-on question about the means testing for the 6 sessions and more, and kind of what that entails. Essentially, what we're looking at there is our responsibilities to our donors and our trustees to ensure that those receiving more significant levels of support, and I mean that in a financial perspective, aren't doing so when actually they have the means to pay for it themselves. So generally speaking, that will relate to whether or not you've got a really significant, and I'm talking really significant amount of savings that you're kind of sitting on, and that you could actually self-fund, when in fact obviously colleagues have kind of have donated to the charity for people who are unable to support it themselves. So it is a bit of an admin process to go through, but the team obviously try to make that as kind of easy and simple as possible. And a lot of the information you can provide during the online application, and then someone will just get in touch if they need to understand anything else. Let's move on to some other questions here. Just we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. I think you've already answered this one, folks, but just in case you want to expand, the question is, do you work with parent-child relationships?
Dee?
Yes, we do. Yep. That's quite, I mean, it may be, we talked a bit about the young person's counselling and how that is for the young person, but sometimes, you know, they may want an element of advocacy really from the counsellor. So it may be that we're not doing family counselling in that case, but we are bringing the parent in the room and helping the parent and the young person to talk about some issues. But yeah, predominantly in family counselling, I think it probably quite often is parent-child relationships. You know, I would say most of the family counselling I have done has been around that, either the sort of teenage years sort of issues, or sometimes, you know, children who are in their 20s and 30s who want to resolve difficulties with their more, you know, older parents.
Sure, and there's a kind of related question where someone's put a smiley face next to it. So I think it's probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it says it's a cliche, but with Christmas coming up, I actually dread all of our family being together because there's always arguments. How big a group counselling would you be able to support?
Well, I mean, we definitely say, I mean, December in the run up to Christmas is quite a quiet time for us because everybody's busy preparing for Christmas. But then January, it's like a hotline to our number. I mean, it's a combination of exactly that. People are in a room with people, you know, the rest of the family that they maybe don't spend that much time with normally in that intense situation. It's a combination of that, and also New Year, New Year's resolution. In fact, one of my colleagues said to me the other day when we were talking about this, she said, you know, realistically, how often would I normally spend, you know, a week or 10 days in the house with my partner? Normally, if we'd spend that much time together, we're on holiday and we don't have anything to worry about because we're sunning ourselves on a beach. So it's a lot of pressure, and we do see a lot of people coming to us in the new year.
I think saying that about holidays, September is another time we peak because sometimes people, and I think that's due to the, you know, things aren't good, but once we get on holiday, it'll be great, and then it isn't. So people think, oh, I need to do something. Going back to, I mean, although the question clearly, you know, I'm not going to offer to pop round on Christmas Day and counsel this person and their family, but we can see. I mean, I think the largest group I've seen is a family of about 6 or 7, and I actually was able to do that with a co-counsellor, which is something we might use with a larger group. But as we said earlier, it might be that you saw sort of 2 or 3 people together, and then you saw, you know, people in different combinations. But it is possible to see quite a large group of, you know, 7, 8 people really. But I would recommend it's done with 2 counsellors because you need to make sure everyone has a bit of time really.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. There's some more kind of some more serious questions here really. Not that one wasn't serious, but so this one, I'm convinced my best friend's relationship with her boyfriend is abusive, although she's never disclosed this. In these circumstances, is relationship counselling appropriate?
Dee?
Right. I mean, when as part of our assessment we see the couple together, we would also do some individual sessions early on in the counselling, and part of those are, you know, the statistics and studies show that it's really useful to see people individually and give them that bit of space, and we would keep those sessions confidential. If people reveal something in them that would be that is useful in the couple counselling or is going to hamper it, then we obviously might talk about how we might bring that into it. Because sometimes people will tell you about an affair in that individual session because they actually do want to share that within the couple. But also those individual sessions are ones where we look a little bit at what might be going on in the relationship. Is there any abuse? Is there any coercive control? It is a really difficult area. I mean, we don't work with relationships where there is coercive control or abuse, because obviously we wouldn't want to be encouraging that relationship, so to speak, if that was the case. But we would obviously be working probably more with people as individuals to, help the person who was perhaps being abused to realise that this wasn't a healthy relationship, and to seek help and support from specialist agencies who can help them with that. And in some cases, depending on how people present, you can have people who, saying that, who are the abuser, who might say, I really want to change this, so we could help support them to make some changes, or again to access more specialist agencies to help with that. But obviously you will get some relationships where the person who might be controlling or abusive absolutely thinks they're right and doesn't think they need to change their behaviours. And all that you can do is sort of perhaps do some work with the person who's in that relationship, but they may not want to see that it's an abusive relationship yet. And so it's a very skillful bit of work about helping people to realise what might be going on and whether they want to do anything about it, and how safe they are to do anything about it, which is hence we would work very much with other agencies like Women's Aid or local independent domestic abuse advisors, etc.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? And it's also, I mean, the effect on this person as well is difficult. If you're concerned about your friend, your own well-being is also going to suffer. So it's a tricky one, but hopefully that's helped a little bit. Next one, since the loss of my mother, my father and I's relationship has been really strained. I'm not sure what to do and whether it's relationship or bereavement counselling that I should really be exploring.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, there's probably, I think a lot of relationship counselling does focus on loss, and so whilst we're not like Cruz, who are bereavement specialists, we, loss of the relationship, loss of, your innocence if there's been an affair and that's damaged the trust, the loss is a big part of our lives, really. But when you have suffered a significant bereavement, and that has obviously altered the family dynamics there, hasn't it? So there may be a bit of both, really, but I would say that from the Relate point of view, if that person was coming with her father to me as a family counselling, I would be wanting to sort of explore, what that loss meant to both of them, the role that the mother might have played as the peacemaker before, maybe they've never really had to have much of a one-to-one relationship because a lot of it went through the mother when she was here. And I think a child's reaction, even if you're an adult child, to a loss of a parent is again different to losing a partner, and one of the classic things there is that I think you can replace a partner. I mean, I know a lot of us don't want to, but that does happen. Whereas you can never replace a parent. You only really ever have one parent or two parents. But, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we've got 2 questions left. So let's try and do those if we can. This one, I'm in a same-sex relationship and we're going through a really bad patch. My question is, are Relate experienced in supporting same-sex relationships, and how do I suggest to my partner that we may need counselling?
Yes, we see lots of same-sex relationships, both male and female, and I think we are all experienced in that. It's part of diversity and cultural diversity, sexual diversity, are all things that we cover in our training and keep people up to date on. So certainly Relate would be the place to come. How you suggest it to your partner. I think, yeah, that's quite an interesting question, because that's a big one, isn't it? If they're a bit oblivious and you suddenly say it, but I would probably present it in the way, especially given they're in your situation of, there is this opportunity through work for us to have 4 sessions, and it might be really helpful for us to go and talk sooner rather than later about some of the sort of issues that come up for us.
Yeah,
Finding
it's
that place
always going to be tricky, isn't it, to find the right time?
I would say that it's best to do it when you're not arguing, often in the car, or if you're walking, good places for people to have those difficult conversations. So yeah.
Okay, and the very last question, my sister and I fell out about money several years ago. I miss her terribly and would love to make contact again, but I'm just really scared of rejection. Any advice?
Yeah, that is a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think, when you put yourself out there, and I suppose I would say to that person that you perhaps have to weigh up, what's the greatest benefit. So if she's saying, well, I'm really missing my sister, and I really would like to be in touch, maybe offering that olive branch, or just being honest and writing a letter or an email or saying that. And actually, is it better to have taken that chance and be rejected, but thinking how you will deal with that rejection, but also perhaps thinking that sometimes, it may be that they get a rejection initially, but then her sister might, or his sister might, think about that a bit and then, respond. But I guess it's weighing up which is the greater pain, really, the loss or the fear of the rejection.
There's always a cliche again, isn't there, about this time of year, about kind of trying to kind of bridge those relationship gaps as well. So I think people can feel a bit of pressure about that sometimes.
Yeah. But that in itself is something that, it's a relationship issue you could book in to see a counsellor about.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for. As Carole mentioned, there are other slides which I'm just flicking through on the screen now, which are in this pack, which is available to download from the charity's website, so that you could take this away and have a look. And obviously, don't forget you can also apply for the voucher code on our website as well. Final slide on our screen is the website address. There's also our free phone number at the charity, so if you want to kind of discuss the support that the charity can offer and find out more information, you can always call us, and obviously our social media channels on there as well. Massive thank you to Carole and Dee. I think some fantastic questions there, some really thoughtful, kind of detailed questions. Any final words from you folks?
Thank you very much for having us. It's been really good to sort of talk about it and hopefully spread the word a bit and answer those questions.
Yeah, and for me, I guess it just to say really that I would say something that was on the last of our slides was that it's never too late really, and if you feel that there's something that's affecting you, that's really, a relationship nature, whether you're single and you can't make relationships work for some reason, or you're in a bad relationship or relationship at work, do go online and book in for some light touch sessions, and because it is worth exploring, and it's never too late to at least try.
Wonderful. Thank you both once again, and thank you to everyone for attending and contributing today. A recording of the session will be available on our website, hopefully by the end of the week. Thanks again.
Bye.